Fear and Hunger is without a doubt the most terrifying game I have ever played. Now, I am not one who typically scares easily. However, this game managed to deeply disturb me to my very core. In this video, I will showcase why this game is a masterclass in horror, while also sharing some of my own personal experiences. A quick warning, this game is not for the faint of heart and deals with sensitive subject matters. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Fear and Hunger is a survival horror RPG set in a medieval dark fantasy world. It draws inspiration from works such as Silent Hill, Dark Souls, and Berserk. The game was created through the passion and dedication of a single developer, Miro Havarenen. Even more impressive was the fact that this was his debut video game release, so one must praise his ability to create such an intricate work of art, relatively unaided and with little experience. As soon as you boot up the game, you'll be met with an ominous title screen, accompanied by an equally unsettling background track. This eerie atmosphere appropriately sets the mood for when you embark on your journey. But before that, we must select our character. There are a total of 4 characters that you can play as: the mercenary Kahara, the knight Dars, the dark priest Enki, and the outlander Ragnvalda. Each of the characters have their own motivations for entering the dungeons of Fear and Hunger, but are all centered around a man named Lagard. Lagard is described to be a larger-than-life character with a captivating presence that drew people towards him. He is leader of a mercenary group called the Knights of the Midnight Sun, their purpose being to create a unified kingdom, free from violence. As the power and influence of Lagard's army grew, they would catch the attention of the current reigning power in the western region, Rondon, who now perceived Lagard as a threat to their empire. Despite their outward success, Lagard was dissatisfied with their progress, which drove him to consult all manner of ancient texts for guidance. From his research, he concluded that the key to unifying the lands is tied to an artifact currently possessed by the kingdom of Oldegard. He was determined to obtain this relic by any means, even if it meant resorting to violence. After invading Oldegard, the kingdom of Rondon seized this opportunity to tarnish Lagard's name, turning public opinion against him. They then swiftly launched an assault against the Knights of the Midnight Sun, crushing their forces and imprisoning Lagard in the dungeon of Fear and Hunger. Dars was originally a knight of Rondon, but left after learning of their true cruel nature that only sought to further themselves. She eventually encountered Lagard and agreed to join the Midnight Sun, whom her ideals were much more in line with. From the very moment they met, Dars was enamored by Lagard and served him faithfully until his capture. She luckily managed to escape the assault from Rondon and must now save her commander from the clutches of the dungeon. Ragnvalda is a warrior from the lands of Oldegard. The conditions in Oldegard were harsh and the resources scarce. To alleviate the suffering of his people, Ragnvalda embarked on an expedition to the dark continent of Vinland, where instead of sustenance, he would find an artifact that he almost felt compelled to take home with him. Shortly after the expedition, the kingdom of Oldegard would be massacred by the Knights of the Midnight Sun in search of the artifact. Ragnvalda would lose both his wife and child in this tragedy. Overcome by grief and anger, he now sets his sights on Lagard as the object of his revenge. Enki is regarded as one of the most notorious dark priests of the modern age. He devoted his life to the pursuit of knowledge, and his merit was even recognized by the kingdoms of Rondon, granting him access to their libraries. Despite all his accomplishments, Enki was still dissatisfied. He felt that he was missing something important. At his wit's end, he learns of a prophecy of a man destined to usher in a new age for mankind, leading them to greater heights. Envious and frustrated, Enki would set out to learn more about Lagard and his prophecy in the dungeon of Fear and Hunger. Kahara of the South, born in the eastern sanctuaries and abandoned at birth, He was forced to use any means at his disposal to survive. Kahara would later go on to become a mercenary for hire, which eventually led him to the wealthy kingdom of Rondon. There he would be offered a handsome reward to retrieve the captain of the Midnight Sun from the dungeon. The dungeon of fear and hunger stands before you. You step inside the darkness. You feel your sanity decline with every passing moment. An unnatural hunger begins draining your strength. The darkness seems to close in on you. Near the entrance of the dungeon, you find a note. This nightmare has taken its toll on me. I am devolving into something far lesser than the man I once was. All the high morals and ethics have no value here. The things I've done to survive. There is no place for a miscreant like me in the warmth of the sun anymore. I am part of these dungeons now. Part of this never-ending nightmare. Just one more cog in this machine of fear and hunger. In a way, I find it comforting. I have a definite place in this wicked world. But I am writing this as a warning for anyone who happens to step down to this darkness. Leave now, if it is still possible. A chilling message that serves to warn the player of the mental toll this dungeon will have on you. The first thing you may notice when starting the game is the lack of tutorial or any guidance whatsoever. All you have been told is that you need to find the guard and that he is somewhere in this dungeon. The rest you will have to figure out for yourself. I can tell you straight up, you will not find the guard on your first run. You will die in the most horrific and cruel ways possible, over and over again. This is not really a skill issue as would be the case in other games. This is simply due to the lack of knowledge and experience. This no hand-holding approach is not because the developer was too lazy. It is intentional. There is fear in the unknown. Imagine this, being lost in a pitch-black labyrinth of a dungeon, with ungodly monstrosities lurking around every corner. There is no map, no navigation system, no one to guide you. You are helpless. When you engage an enemy, you are met with an unfamiliar combat system. For some reason, your attacks keep missing, your limbs keep getting cut off, and you can now no longer hold your weapon. You are instantly killed by an unlucky coin flip. You step on a rusty nail and die of an infection. You try and save your progress, but are instead ambushed and killed by an enemy, losing hours of time. You fall into an excessively deep toilet where you are trapped, knee-deep in feces. You begin to contemplate why you ever decided to play this game. This is typically how most people's first few runs of the game go. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, this is where they quit, deciding the game is not for them. At its surface level, fear and hunger may seem excessively cruel and unfair, which it is, but only for those who lack the understanding of the game's mechanics. Now, to obtain this information of how the game works, one will need to persevere through the initial suffering. But rest assured, this suffering is not in vain. As unlike most games, the most effective way to grow stronger in fear and hunger is not by leveling up. It is through the acquirement of knowledge. And how do you get this knowledge, you ask? Well, hear me out, guys, and I know this may sound crazy, but read. Books, item descriptions, dialogue, everything. If you don't read and pay attention, you are going to have a bad time. Reading will provide you with knowledge on the most essential game mechanics required for survival, and any information not available through reading will have to be acquired through experimentation. Upon opening the in-game menu, you will notice 3 bars under your character: hunger, body, and mind. Body refers to your health, which is fairly self-explanatory. Beware though, Healing items are few and far between in the dungeon, so learning how to effectively conserve your health is key. Outside of combat, your character's hunger bar will gradually increase over time, and as a result, they will become progressively weaker in terms of their damage output, as well as their maximum health. Mind refers to a character's mental state. Like hunger, this will also slowly decrease over time, but also can be expedited by certain enemies. Low mind will prevent your character from using certain skills and spells, as well as cause members of your party to have mental breakdowns, forcing you to leave them behind. Hunger, as you can imagine, is reduced by eating food, which is one of the few resources which are relatively plentiful in the game. However, many of the food items you come across will be rotten and carry a chance of poisoning you. Mind-restoring items, on the other hand, are much harder to come by, but usually include things such as alcohol, tobacco, and opium. The stronger the substance, the more mind it restores. Now, using highly addictive drugs such as opium may not seem like the best idea, but once you witness the horrors of this dungeon, addiction will be the last thing you need to worry about. Under your character's name, you will see a phobia of some sort. Each time you start a new game, a phobia will be randomly assigned to your character. Phobias make you more vulnerable to certain enemies, reducing your evasion as well as the damage you receive. Regardless of your starting phobia, upon reaching 0 mind, you will receive panphobia, the fear of all things. One of the first books you acquire is the Book of Fears, which is present at the entrance of the dungeon. This will give you a brief overview of the various phobias in the game. Another essential book which you can acquire from bookshelves is the Anatomia, which teaches you about one of the core dangers of the game, which are status effects. These include inflictions such as bleeding, infection, poison, burning, and so on. These effects are not exclusive to combat and can also be caused by traps and items. Pay very close attention to these effects, as they can very well end runs if left untreated. And once again, treatments for these ailments are very rare. Sometimes you will be forced into situations where you have no other choice but to saw off your own limb to prevent yourself dying from infection. The turn-based combat of Fear and Hunger can be quite daunting at first due to its unique nature. You will immediately notice that you are able to separately target each of your enemy's limbs. Each limb has its own health pool. Destroying the head or torso of an enemy usually kills it. However, the torso has the highest amount of hit points out of the limbs, and the head has a very high chance of evasion. Destroying a limb means an enemy is no longer able to attack using that limb. This is important, as most of the enemies in the game will attack you with multiple limbs each turn. Keep in mind that just as you can sever your enemy's limbs, they can do the same to you. Losing a limb can be devastating to a run. Losing an arm will mean you are no longer able to use two-handed weapons or shields. Losing a leg significantly slows down your movement speed, and losing both arms or both legs essentially means your run is over. So, it is in your best interest to start off by targeting the enemy's limbs that pose the most threat to you, which is typically the ones brandishing weapons. After you have dampened your enemy's attack power, you should then move on to their legs. Destroying both legs puts the enemy off balance, leaving their head vulnerable to attack. This strategy can be applied to almost any foe you encounter, and is given to you by an NPC you find very early on in the game. Obviously, this will not be applicable in every scenario, as enemies have varying amount of limbs and different attack patterns, but one can still apply the same basic concept. Now we are going to discuss one of the most controversial mechanics in the game, the coin flip. Starting specifically with its application in combat, many enemies in the game will make use of coin flip attacks, where the player has to choose between heads or tails to determine whether the attack lands. If the player chooses incorrectly, they will either be instantly killed in brutal fashion, or suffer severe damage and/or status effects. Seems unfair, right? No, in fact, it's quite the opposite. You see, you can prevent any coin flip attack simply by guarding. All you have to know is when the attack is coming, which is indicated by some sort of on-screen text. Once again, we can thank Sir Seymour for this crucial information. If you want even more safety from coin flip attacks, in the case that you forget to guard or mistime it, there are items in the game called lucky coins that allow you to flip 2 coins at once, thus increasing your chances of success from 1 in 2 to 3 in 4. Now, I see a lot of people saying that the game doesn't outright tell you how to use lucky coins like it's some big secret. Well, all you had to do was open your inventory and read the item description. Let's now apply all of Sir Seymour's tactics to one of the first enemies you will encounter in the game, the guard. We start by attacking his arm holding the cleaver, as this will dismember our limbs. We then see the prompt for the coin flip attack, so we guard. We then proceed to attack his quote-unquote stinger, as this is the second most damaging limb in his arsenal. Next, we destroy his legs, putting him off balance. We can now finally attack his head. Amazing what a little strategy can do. The first time I encountered the guard, he seemed almost undefeatable, and now I have a safe and reliable way to dispatch him. So yay, combat solved, right? Wrong. Remember, this is just a strategy, and strategies can always fail. Missing a single attack can very well lead to your doom. Something I wished I learned earlier on in my playthrough is that you should not try and kill every enemy you encounter. In fact, you should be doing the opposite. You should be trying to actively avoid and outrun almost every enemy you encounter and leave fighting as a last resort. You do not get any experience for defeating enemies. Most of the time, you do not get anything at all. At most, you may find a moldy piece of bread from their corpse. The risk to reward ratio for engaging in combat is not worth it in most cases. I know I have said it several times now, but resources are despairingly scarce, and every battle just depletes your already limited supply even more. Remember, you are not the hero in this story. You are just some unfortunate souls who happen to get caught up in this nightmare with powers at play far beyond your imagination. Every action you take should be with your survival in mind. Now, as I said, there is no level up system in this game. Character progression is handled through skill trees. This is the main way our 4 characters differ in terms of gameplay. Each character has their own skill tree. Enki's tree is centered around magic and necromancy, allowing you to resurrect the dead. Ragnvaldr's skill tree focuses on survival, allowing you to devour defeated enemies as well as injuring them before combat. Darsa's skill tree provides you with many useful battle tactics, and Kahara's tree gives you utility skills such as stealing, lockpicking, and an increased chance of escaping battle. Out of the 4 characters, I think Kahara is by far the best, especially for newcomers. His skill escape plan has saved me on numerous occasions and will allow you to avoid almost any enemy. But by all means, experiment and see what works for you. Also note that the 3 characters you don't choose will be available in the dungeon to join your party. You acquire skills via 2 methods. In the intro sequence after you choose your character, and in-game through the use of hexen tables. In the intro sequence, you will be given a choice, following various scenarios, and depending on your choice, you will receive different skills and items. Do not skip the intro, as you will be given a default set of skills which are not optimal. In a lot of these scenarios, you are actually rewarded for making the less morally sound choice. Take for example Kahara. If you choose to lead an honest life, you will miss out on 2 useful skills, lockpicking and steal. If you choose to abandon your comrades, you get one of the best skills in the game, escape plan. This actually gives you a good idea of what type of world you are living in. It is cruel and dark, with no place for morals. Your number 1 priority should be survival. The second way you get skills is by killing an enemy, using a soul stone on their corpse to acquire their soul, and then to offer their soul to the gods of this foul planet. As you explore the dungeon, you will encounter various beds that you can sleep in, which will save your progress. The catch is that most of these beds are locked behind a coin flip, with the exception of two, one at the start of the game and one at the very end. These two beds are guaranteed saves. Now as for the other beds, if you fail the coin flip, you will be ambushed by a nearby enemy, which again seems ridiculous, right? Well, think about this. This is a dungeon filled with dangerous creatures. Of course, there's a chance of being attacked in your sleep when you are at your most vulnerable. At least the game gives you a chance to fight the enemy or run away instead of outright killing you. If you fail the coin flip, you can always try again. You can also use a lucky coin to increase your chances, or better yet, if you manage to clear the area of all enemies, you can use the bed without any danger. I personally like the way saving is handled. It carries a significant risk without being unfair. It also rewards you for taking the time to defeat all the nearby enemies. While we are on the topic of coin flips, let's talk about its other implementations in the game. You come across an armor stand and search it in hopes of getting better gear, only to find nothing. You are walking around the dungeon and the floor suddenly breaks, sending you even deeper into the darkness. You read an ancient book to learn a spell, but instead you lose your mind. This is just absurd, right? There can't possibly be a good rationale for this. Well, for once you are right. It is unfair. Aside from using lucky coins, there is no way around these events like with the coin flip attacks or saving. Some things are completely up to chance and sometimes you are just unlucky. Deal with it. The dungeon is not your friend. Some may chalk this up to bad game design, but picture that there was no coin flip mechanic in the game. Loot is still going to be randomized, meaning there's still a chance you will not receive anything good. But because the player physically sees the method used to determine their reward in front of them, they feel cheated. If anything, I would argue that this is great game design, as it achieves the same result but creates a sense of regret in the player, cursing themselves for not choosing the other option. As for the cursed book and the floor breaks, well, these events form a minor part of the game, and sometimes you just have to learn by trial and error. There are some things in the game that serve no other purpose but to punish you and remind you that not every option has a reward behind it. You have to be skeptical about everything and proceed with extreme caution. You will be deceived and lied to. Merchants will sell healing potions that do nothing but poison you. Party members will steal your possessions before abandoning you. NPCs will trick you and then brutally torture you to a slow and painful death. But death in this game is a mercy. There are much more wicked and gruesome consequences in this game than death. For the sake of this video, I will not describe or show what specifically happens, but after losing in battle, some enemies may spare your life, drag your body into a cell, and leave you with the status effect, anal bleeding. I'm sure you can piece together what I'm alluding to. If you haven't noticed already, this game is seriously messed up. It's another reason why many choose to avoid the game despite being interested in its other aspects, and I can very much understand that perspective. But I also see the intent of the developer with this feature. It creates a sense of primal fear like no other, an additional consequence to losing a battle that is far more sinister and twisted. I was truly horrified the first time I bore witness to the act, and it made me actively avoid the enemy in subsequent runs. From what I can tell, there are only two abominations that inflict anal bleeding, the Guard and the Night Lurch, so I would recommend learning how to deal with these two enemies first if you want to avoid the trauma. The art design in the game is definitely one of its strongest aspects. Enemy design particularly is unique, varied, and terrifying. You can't tell because I'm playing a censored version of the game, But the game contains a lot of nudity, particularly of the phallic nature. Here's a different censored mod that gives you a better idea of what you are dealing with. Yeah, so if this is something that makes you uncomfortable, you could always use a censor mod, but you will also be missing out on some part of the horror. There's something very unsettling about fighting a beast with its genitalia exposed, and it does make sense. These monstrosities have little sense of self. Why would they care about covering themselves? Enemies aside, the environments too have been carefully crafted, each telling a story and contributing to the eerie atmosphere. A dungeon shrouded in darkness, bodies hanging from posts, floors littered with blood. All this creates an immediate sense of danger. Mountains of rotting corpses and decrepit structures make you ponder when all this began. Human sacrifices, ritual circles, and statues of otherworldly beings make you wonder about the greater forces at play. This environmental art design in combination with the chilling soundtrack create a tension like no other. A central part of the Fear and Hunger lore are the gods. There are three main types of gods referenced to in the game: the old gods, the ascended gods, and the new gods. The old gods are hailed as the true gods of the universe, possessing unimaginable power. There are quite a few old gods mentioned in the game, but the ones that are most relevant are Groguroth, the god of destruction, Sylvian, the goddess of creation, and the unnamed god of the depths. In addition to the old gods, there is one other being who rivals their supremacy, the Ascended One, All-Mur. All-Mur was once human, born of a virgin mother. He would eventually be crucified by those fearful of his growing influence. But All-Mur would ascend from the cross into something greater, something with the power to compete with the old gods. In Fear and Hunger, you are able to worship and gain affinity with the four gods I just mentioned. This is done by praying to them at ritual circles and their respective statues. However, the god of the depths has no monuments and cannot be prayed to. This is likely because this god has a relatively smaller following compared to the other deities, so you will have to find other means of worshipping it. As a reward for worshipping these gods, they will teach you valuable skills that will no doubt aid your survival in the dungeon. Aside from praying, Groguroth and Sylvian will also give you their favor for certain less morally sound actions. Namely, human sacrifice and cannibalism for Groguroth, and orgies and marriage for Sylvian. Now you may be asking yourself, what is wrong with marriage? That seems like a perfectly acceptable thing. Well, marriage in Fear and Hunger is not at all similar to its real-life phenomenon. It is something far more repulsive and grotesque. A better way to phrase it would be marriage of the flesh. It is a ritual where two individuals fuse together, both in terms of their body and their soul, resulting in a new being. The product, while unsightly, is stronger and is healed from any previous afflictions, although the personalities of the participants seem to be somewhat lost in the process. I must praise the game's creator for coming up with such a unique concept, taking one of humanity's most beautiful practices and twisting it into something truly frightening. Despite the initial guidance from the old gods, humanity would still fall into darkness and ruin. 809 years after the birth of All-Mur, feeling dissatisfied and abandoned by the old gods, a group of 5 like-minded individuals would come together to replace them. They would later be known as the Fellowship. The group consisted of Francois, the Dominating One, Voltail, the Enlightened One, Nilvan, the Endless One, Chambara, the Tormented One, and a 5th member, whose name was erased from history, now only referred to as the Forgotten One. The Fellowship sought out the ancient city of Mahabre, where it is said that man could meet their maker. There they would face grueling trials set by the old gods, but they still managed to persevere. However, at the end of their journey, the Forgotten One hesitated in light of the words of the old gods. They were told that their endeavor was meaningless, that many had set out on the same path before them and ultimately managed to change nothing. The other 4 members would not waver in what they set out to do and simply dismiss the old gods' words as lies. They would attempt to follow in the steps of Olmer and ascend to godhood. These 4 would later be worshipped as the new gods, creating a new era for mankind. However, it is plain to see that their power and influence has dwindled. The world has yet again fallen into a perilous state, which begs the question, were the old gods right? Is there truly no saving humanity? How is it that the old gods and Olmer still hold so much influence over the population, while the new gods have now almost been forgotten? What is it that they were missing? Why did their ascension fail? These are all the questions I was having upon discovering the deep and interesting lore of Fear and Hunger. I love when games utilize this approach of indirect storytelling, as it makes uncovering the mysteries all the more rewarding. The obvious downside being that many may miss out on crucial parts of the story if they are not willing to explore and investigate. Within this obscenely wicked dungeon, you will come across a young girl locked in a cage. She is weeping uncontrollably. Who knows what horrors she had to endure. We picked the lock open and set her free. Without saying a word, she joins your party. The girl is definitely one of the weakest recruitable party members, not offering much in terms of battle, but it would be too cruel to leave her to fend for herself. The girl is extremely reserved and shy, likely due to the trauma she suffered in this wretched place. Thus, we cannot ascertain who she is or how she ended up in the dungeon. But her background matters little. She is a defenseless child trapped in this place of unspeakable cruelty. We must protect her at all costs. This poor girl reacts to any act of compassion with great surprise and gratitude, suggesting that this is something she is not accustomed to. Even crude items like a small dagger or a worn-out doll elicit great excitement in her. It is nearly impossible for anyone with a heart to not grow attached to her. One of the most essential things you can do to increase your survival in the dungeon is to recruit others to your party. After finding the girl, the next potential party member you will encounter will most likely be Enki. He is initially very closed off and not willing to engage in conversation, so it is best to leave him be for now. Just past Enki, through a hidden passage to the backyard, you will meet Dragonvalder, who is much warmer to the player. He will answer all of your questions, but still refuses to join your expedition, viewing you as a liability. Our search for companions is not going as expected, but nevertheless we must push on. For now we must make do with the girl and the skeleton. As we descend further into the depths of the dungeon, we come across the cave wolf. This is one of the few times where you are actually rewarded for talking to your enemy, as by feeding the wolf 2 pieces of rotten meat, we are able to recruit her as an ally. It is here in the caverns of the dungeon that we encounter our first boss. Numerous egg-like structures occupy the area. The sound of flapping wings slowly approaches. The Cave Mother, a horrible amalgamation of human and avian qualities. She is clearly more formidable than your average enemy, but our party has grown strong. She summons her foul offspring to help her, but it matters little. We manage to drive her off, but this victory is short-lived, as she quickly returns, charging her broken body at us. She is much weaker than before, and is now simply making one last stand before her inevitable defeat. With our heads held triumphantly, we explore the rest of the caverns, and it is here we find a creature far more horrifying than the Cave Mother. A man with the head of a cat, clothed in unusually lavish garments. His hand is tightly embedded in his pocket. He is unusually calm and suspiciously friendly, but despite this happy demeanor, he exudes a wicked aura. He claims to be a merchant, but will not accept any form of money. The only thing he wants is human children. His eyes immediately gravitate to the girl. He makes revolting comments about her hips and ankles. The girl, who is no stranger to evil and cruelty, is visibly frightened by the pocket cat. He seems to desperately want the girl and offers you some of the most rare and powerful items in the game in exchange for her. Without any hesitation, we refuse. We had already decided to protect this girl with our life. We would not be tempted by this malicious being, no matter how dire our situation is. We can learn more about the malevolence of this entity by reading The Chilling Tale of the Pocket Cat. The Tale of the Pocket Cat, Chapter 1. It was a rainy day in the countryside, just north from the forest of Merwood. Willem, the wildest child in town, would stare at the raindrops behind the window screen. His mother would warn him of going outside. During rain, decent boys would help their parents with various indoor tasks, for rain brings forth all kinds of dangers. Disregarding the warnings, and without a worry in the world, Willem dashed through the bushes and ran deep into the Merwood forest. In the heart of the forest, all wet from the rain, Willem heard slight panting noises from an overgrown grotto nearby. Cautiously, Willem peeked through the leaves. He would not believe his eyes when he saw a finely dressed cat standing on 2 feet, twice as tall as Willem's father would be. The cat's back was facing Willem. Its hand was moving swiftly inside its pocket, while its 2 big yellow eyes gleamed inside a girl-lit bag. Suddenly, the hand movement came to a halt. Even though Willem was well hidden behind the leaves, the cat would swiftly turn its eyes towards him. In terror, Willem ran as fast as he could towards his home. The 2 glowing eyes of the cat haunted him all the way to his home gates. The Tale of the Pocket Cat, Chapter 2. The town of Merwood was in festive mood. It was the beginning of the harvest season, and food was plentiful. Willem's mother and father were arranging a large party for all the big families of the town. Even some of the noble ones were expected to show up from outside the town. Willem had to wear his Sunday suit, the suit he would typically wear when going to church. Needless to say, the suit wasn't to Willem's liking. Now, you know we need to make a good impression to the city folk, his mother would say. Why should I care? Said Willem. Willem's mother would pull him by the ear violently and say, Don't you understand our livelihood depends on those nobles? Willem shrugged it off and nodded. It is important to obey your parents after all, if you are to grow up even somewhat decent and moral. It is even written on the book of our Lord, the Bible of Olma. The party guests started coming as the sun set. The festive people were of all kinds. You had the well-eaten mayor of the town, with his wife who was so young, she couldn't have been more than 3 years older than Willem. You had the Parkinsons from next door, with their faces forever set on the expression of pure disgust. There were also many people Willem had never seen before, especially one gleeful gentleman with a constant grin on his face that caught Willem's attention. The man also noticed young Willem. He winked his eye, while perfectly maintaining that same unsettling grin. Shivers ran down Willem's spine. The full moon had risen to its highest, and the festival was at its peak. But Willem noticed that the gleeful gentleman was missing. After a short search, he found the man in their backyard, growling at the moon. This already made young Willem very nervous, but then the man turned his gaze towards Willem. It was the same haunting yellow eyes Willem had seen in the Merwood forest. Suddenly, Willem realized the size of the man. For some reason, he had not realized it before, but the man was now almost the same height as their house. With a cat-like expression, the man would say, "Fancy meeting you here, young mister." The illustration on the book looks very lifelike. The pocket cat seems to stare straight at you from the book's pages. The pocket cat would say, "So, how do you think we should handle this situation now that you've seen something you shouldn't have?" At this point, the pocket cat breaks the fourth wall, directly addressing the player, in which we are forced to respond. Out of instinctive fear, we try and appease the monster. "I won't say a thing. You can trust me." "Is that so? Well, we need to have a common secret so that I can truly trust you. Would you like that? Would you love that? Would you love me?" With a perverse grin on his face, the pocket cat puts his other hand into his pocket. "Well, let's not dwell on those matters. The night is festive. It is a full moon after all." While the cat-like man stares at the moon, he also murmurs something. "Oh, the old one. My lullabies go to deaf ears. Mankind continues to pursue the same goal so persistently." The cat asks you one last question. "If I were to give the moon itself to you, would you give up on your quest and lay with me here for the night?" Despite our feelings of terror, we cannot comply with this request. We came to this dungeon for a reason, and we cannot stop now. "No, I'm afraid I can't do that." "You really are to torment my heart and soul, aren't you?" the pocket cat says with a sad expression on his face. The pocket cat is as mysterious as he is terrifying. There is clearly something more to him, but we can deal with him another day. For now, we have more pressing matters to deal with. We proceed into the mines where we meet an alchemist by the name of Nostramus. He has an otherworldly presence about him, but before we can question him, he disappears into the darkness. Within the mines, we find a settlement of cave dwellers, primal and savage beings. They offer little in terms of communication, but are at the very least non-hostile. One particular cave dweller does make an attempt to converse with us, but she is immediately killed by one of her own people. It would seem contact with humans is forbidden, for one reason or the other. As we explore deeper into the cave dweller's settlement, we make a shocking discovery. At the edge of the cliff lies a massive creature which appears to be dormant. This is in fact the remains of an old god, the god of the depths. Directly beneath the dungeon of fear and hunger lies the traces of an old god. Without a doubt, this is the source of darkness, causing the dungeon to deform into something so malignant. But we are just powerless mortals. Even knowing its cause, we have no power to stop the evil. The best we can do is to complete our original task and then leave this horrid place. On an altar nearby the god, we find the Cube of the Depths. This is the artifact Lagard slaughtered Ragnvald's people for. No doubt it will be of great importance later on. We remove the cube from the altar, but doing so causes the cave dwellers to become hostile. However, the savages pose little threat to us. We see a familiar face waiting for us back at the settlement. The fiend now wishes to discuss the philosophy of happiness after previously demanding I hand over the girl to him. He truly is an enigma. The stress of the dungeon seems to finally be catching up with the girl. She seems to be in serious distress. This place truly is too cruel for someone her age. She looks at us, teary-eyed. We try to comfort her, vowing once again to make sure nothing happens to her. This seems to put her at ease. We then find Dars getting her head bashed in by one of the cave dwellers. It would appear she had been ambushed and outnumbered. After helping her, she is more than willing to join our party, obviously feeling shaken after the incident. Back in the mines, we encounter the salmon snake, a giant fish-like beast. Despite its intimidating appearance, we are able to dispatch it with relative ease. It would seem our party has grown quite strong, but we would soon be reminded of just how weak and experienced we truly are, and that there are foes far beyond our capabilities. Within this dungeon, there exists a being capable of striking fear into our hearts with just one simple phrase. A terrifying presence has entered the room. The Crow Mauler is an exceedingly powerful enemy who will relentlessly stalk and pursue you throughout the game. He will attack you in your sleep, chase you around the dungeon, and stare menacingly at you behind bars. He is, without question, one of the strongest bosses in the game, and will make quick work of unprepared parties. Despite lacking a coin flip attack, the Crow Mauler is capable of instantly killing any party member with his peck. He can summon a flock of crows, inflicting blindness on the player, effectively ending your run. Finally, he can maul the player with his crude weapon, crushing your bones, which permanently reduces your health. It is highly recommended that you avoid him until later on in the game, as fighting him early on is akin to certain death. It is not a stretch to say the Crow Mauler is the symbol of fear and hunger. But just who is this deadly adversary? Well, his tale is quite a tragic one. You see, the Crow Mauler was once a highly decorated knight of Rondon by the name of Rudemer. Due to his merit, he was eventually assigned as captain of the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. Through his journal entries, we learn how the mind of the once great hero of Rondon was slowly twisted and corrupted by the immense cruelty of the dungeon. The Captain's Diary, Part 2. It was a mistake to take this position in these dungeons. It's next to impossible to keep any kind of order among troops here. There are powers at play that we as mere mortals cannot fight against. But I've come to accept the madness. A naked prisoner, crucified on a sacrificial statue with his guts hanging out. Just another day in the dungeon. More and more troops are committing suicide every day. More food for those left. Orders to let some cultists do their wicked rituals here. Anything goes. All the gore and macabre scenery have become trivial to me. The High Priest demanded that we give them our prized prisoner, Legard of the Midnight Sun. I hesitated at first. After all, his worth in propaganda alone cannot be underestimated. But those priests somehow convinced the higher-ups of their ways. Legard was transferred to the lower levels, below the mines. I have no idea what the purpose behind this is. Nothing good can come out of it, but orders are orders. I feel bad for the poor man. It's obvious the Kingdom of Rondon backstabbed him, just because he was gaining influence at such a rapid rate, and now his story ends, defiled in some unholy practice. The Captain's Diary, Part 3. I've had feverish dreams for the longest time now. In the dreams, the patterns on the walls, the caws of the crows, the swirling clouds, they haunt even my waking hours. I haven't had a moment of tranquility in months. It almost feels like the dreams become wilder as the madness in these dungeons grow ever stronger. I don't know which is the result of which. Did the dreams come before the madness, or the dreams results of the ever-ensuing chaos? Everything I see seems to remind me of the dream's otherworldly patterns. I swear the intestines of a gutted prisoner from yesterday took the very same shape. But when I tried to describe its organic, ever-changing pattern to scholars, or draw it down on this very paper, I failed to do so. Like a bonfire, flames reaching out to a night sky, so is its shape, without a concrete form. These shapes are dangerous without a doubt. Effects like these are far too much for mere humans to comprehend. I'm the epitome of their obsession, so I know it better than any. Maybe I am the only sane one left to acknowledge this. Is it my responsibility to clean everything up once again? The crows, they give testament to my suspicions. I will start the purge. I will root out the madness. Only I can do it. From the diary of an unknown god, we learn the ultimate fate of Captain Rudima. He would later be seen running into the depths of the dungeon, wearing nothing but a sheet of cloth. He was dead set on purifying the dungeon from filth and depravity. Little did he know that he would become part of the Black himself. Rudima was such a valued and respected knight that the Crown Prince of Rondon himself would lead a search party to these treacherous dungeons to rescue him. Sadly, they were too late, for the darkness had already engulfed Rudima, leaving behind a monster that devours anything in its path. Deep within the thicket, we are reunited with Ragnvalder. Impressed that we were able to make it this far, he is now willing to join our party. It is here in the thicket that we come across a mysterious organ that is pulsating steadily. It seems to be connected to something bigger. Despite destroying the organ, the veins continue to move, suggesting that whatever it's connected to is still alive. This organ is in fact connected to the god of the depths. It would appear that the old god is much more connected to the dungeon than we initially thought. Its organs have taken root in the place, almost merging together. The dungeons of fear and hunger have now almost become an extension of the god of the depths. Deeper into the mines, we once again meet with the alchemist Nostramus. He is a peculiar character indeed, willingly choosing to stay in the dungeon in the pursuit of knowledge. I suppose he is similar to Enki in that regard. Some of his answers are suspiciously vague, specifically the ones to do with how long he has been here and how he managed to retain his sanity when so many others succumbed to the madness. In any case, he informs us that Lagarde is locked away in the deepest part of the dungeon, just a few floors below us, and that we should make haste as his time is running short. At the lowest level of the dungeon, we find another organ of the god of the depths. Destroying it still does not produce any effects. The darkness runs deep here, as is reflected by the deadly enemies. Here we also find Enki again, deeply immersed in his studies. As usual, he is dismissive at our attempts at conversation, but his attitude changes once he notices that we have an item that may be of value to him. At this point, he becomes available for recruitment. After defeating the worst the dungeon has to offer, the end was in sight. You see a single isolated cell at the end of the passageway. There is no doubt in our mind that this is where Lagarde is being held. We immediately rush towards the gate, but before we can reach it, the wall next to the cell seems to crumble, and from the rubble, the head of a crow emerges. He is now the final barrier between us and Lagarde. We have no choice but to defeat him. This time, we are prepared. In anticipation for our inevitable encounter, we obtain two crucial items that will lead to his undoing. Firstly, the Iron Mask, which can only be obtained by killing an NPC called a Sire. This mask will prevent your character from being blinded. The second item is a red vial, which when thrown at an enemy's head, will blind them, reducing the accuracy of their attacks. With these two items, we finally stand a chance of besting this formidable foe. The battle is tough, but using everything we have learned so far, we are finally able to slay the Crow Mauler. All that remains now is to rescue Lagarde and leave this abominable place. As you approach the cell, you see a dark figure looming in the shadows on the other side of the bars. There is an ominous aura coming from inside. You hesitate in opening the door. You slowly step inside before making a soul-crushing discovery. His throat is cut open. He has been dead for a while. This is the man you came here for, which means that your initial mission has failed. Das takes a step closer to the man. No, this cannot be. Das seems to be trembling and terribly shaken. Did you know this man? She clearly tries to keep tears from flowing. Yes, I loved him. Das starts crying uncontrollably. Ragnvalder seems to hesitate with his words. He seems to feel sorry for Das. You fear something in the dungeon hears Das's loud cries. Ragnvalder is mumbling something, so he met his fate. Revenge feels like a distant memory, now that I see this shadow of a man change here. I am glad I do not have to taint my hands with his blood after all. You can clearly see Das reacting to Ragnvalder's strong words. The girl kneels next to the man. She seems to recognize him from somewhere. There is a slight glimmer in her eyes, resembling a teardrop. Your task in the dungeon is done. There is little to no reason in staying here any longer. As we walk away from Lagarde's body in utter despair, we slowly realize that all our efforts thus far have been for nothing. All the suffering we endured, all the enemies we fought tooth and nail to defeat, was absolutely meaningless. The cruelty of this game knows no bounds. We escaped the dungeon of fear and hunger, but part of us still doesn't believe this to be the truth. Thoughts of regret linger in our mind. Was there any way to save Lagarde? Upon reaching Lagarde for the first time, most players will find him to be dead. You see, there is an in-game timer of 30 minutes, after which Lagarde is killed. Rescuing him seems like an impossible task, but we must persevere, for this is not how the story ends. On our next run, we are stronger, faster, and more driven. We must reach Lagarde before it's too late. Not knowing how much time has passed, we anxiously approach his cell. He is still alive, just barely. We immediately let out a sigh of relief. Das takes a step closer to the man. Lagarde! You can clearly see tears flowing down from the cheeks of Das. She seems to be overjoyed that this man is still alive. The girl kneels next to the man. She seems to recognize him from somewhere. Her eyes are wide open. Ragnvalder seems unusually tense. He squeezes his hands into tight fists. You can almost feel murderous intent radiating from him. You notice Ragnvalder giving you a brief look. He seems to notice your cautious feelings. Ragnvalder gives you a faint smile. This takes you by surprise, but also comforts you. Seems like whatever grudge she has with this man can wait for another day. You try waking him up. The man gets up. Now that you see him better, you realize his body has gone through intense torture, with different scars and marks filling out his skinny torso. His gaunt cheeks and distant eyes only strengthen the idea that this man has seen hell and survived it. Who? What? Lagarde, I'm so glad to see you. Das has trouble speaking any words behind a flow of tears. Lagarde. I can't remember much, but yes, that is my name. You don't remember? I don't remember anything besides my name. I seem to have amnesia. Ragnvalder seems suspicious of Lagarde. It is not necessarily amnesia per se. It could be possible for your mind to block out recent traumatizing events. Yeah, maybe you are right. Lagarde looks at the girl and seems to recognize her. The girl looks back at Lagarde. I don't want to stay here. That much I know for certain. But I feel pretty weak. Do you think I could join your party for the time being? We have successfully saved Lagarde. We can now finally leave the dungeon with no regrets. But as we start walking out his cell, Lagarde seems to be fixated on something deep within the darkness. There is something in the dungeon he believes he came here for. He laments about an ancient city. He does not remember why, but knows he needs to go there. We are left perplexed. We came to this dreadful dungeon to rescue Legard, but now he wishes to remain here. If we try and leave with Legard in our party, he will politely decline, claiming to have unfinished business here. After undergoing such horrific torture, what could make him want to stay here? Against our better judgment, we decide to go back to the door Legard was staring at. An ancient doorway stands before us. It's far too heavy to move by hand, but within its intricate carvings lies a cube-shaped hole. The cube of the depths begins violently shaking in the presence of the door. It would seem that the artifact Legard and Ragnvaldr's people fought so desperately for was a key to whatever lies ahead. The air in this place gives off a completely different vibe from the rest of the dungeon. Before proceeding any further, it is best that we prepare ourselves for the terrors that lie ahead. Despite being extremely malnourished and having his body battered and bruised, Legard is still a powerful ally. We can now tackle any enemies we previously left alone and fully explore the dungeon to make sure we did not miss out on any equipment that may aid us going forward. The best gear and weapons in Fear and Hunger are unique in the fact that they all come with some sort of setback or price. Miasma, one of the strongest swords in the game, which you gain access to after defeating the Crow Mauler, can have disastrous consequences if put into the wrong hands. The sword is cursed by a bloodthirsty sentient spirit which can very easily drive its wielder insane. If the player has low enough sanity, the sword will seize the opportunity to take over your mind and kill everyone in sight. When you come to your senses, you will find everyone in your party massacred. The same thing can happen if someone else in your party is equipped with miasma, only this time you will be forced to fight them. Attempting to reason with them has no effect. Your best bet would be to disarm the sword from them. Remarkably, if the miasma is given to Legard, his exceptional willpower will prevent the sword from taking over him, even with low mind. Other examples of strong weapons that come at a cost are the Eastern Sword, which you can find lodged in the thicket. After removing the blade, you will be pursued by an assassin spectre until you defeat it. The Blue Sin, which is arguably the best overall weapon, will cause the mines to cave in and crush you after taking it. The Sergal Spear, which bolsters the highest damage in the game, requires the sacrifice of 4 arms, which you most likely have to saw off from your party members. The Claymore, which is the second most damaging weapon, can only be obtained by killing Sir Seymour, an innocent man, or trading the girl to the villainous Pocket Cat. In terms of armor, the Iron Mask, which is basically a requirement to beat the Crow Mauler, can only be obtained by killing a sire, a not-so-innocent man but a man nonetheless. The armor with the highest defense can only be acquired by murdering the Gaunt Knight, Sir Cyril, who has risked his life in coming to these dungeons with the sole purpose of rescuing his brother Rudimer, who we now know as the Crow Mauler. Perhaps the best example of powerful equipment that demand a steep toll is the Penance armor, worn exclusively by the Penance Knights of the Vatican before they embark on a mission they do not expect to return from. It is without a doubt the best armor in the game, tied with the Gaunt armor in terms of damage resistance, but completely prevents limb loss and a range of different attacks. However, this incredible armor comes at a grievous price. Once adorned, the Penance armor becomes an inseparable part of its wearer, allowing no chance of removal. The inside of each suit of armor is completely covered in sharp spikes that puncture the wearer's skin, inducing excruciating pain and bleeding. The agony serves to purify the mind of the wearer while also heightening his ferocity during combat. By equipping this armor, you are effectively sentencing your character to death. Even if you manage to escape the dungeon, the penance armor will eventually claim your life, and your death will not be an easy one. With each breath and every step, the spikes penetrate deeper. You are doomed to suffer until the very end. What I am basically trying to say in this long-winded approach is that almost every piece of equipment that is worth using will come with a consequence in one way or the other, and this perfectly fits the theme of fear and hunger. After properly gearing up, we are now ready to continue where we left off. As we step further into the darkness, we find an ancient city in ruins. There is an otherworldly presence about it. The party stands in awe. This place. You know this place? Of course not. There's something you are not telling us. I don't buy this whole amnesia act. What can I say? I can't remember a thing. Ragnvalder clenches his fists. He is seemingly suspicious about Lagarde. There is also anger in his eyes. As we proceed further in the city, we notice that Lagarde and Ragnvalder are missing. They must be back at the entrance. We find the two men fighting violently. You little piece of... I don't know what you want me to say. There's nothing to say anymore. Lagarde is looking to be in very rough shape. His long imprisonment seems to be limiting his fighting capabilities. We try to stop the fight. Ragnvalder, please calm down. You do not understand the things this man is capable of. You do not understand what he is responsible for. I will have my revenge. He must die. At this point, we are faced with the dilemma. If we try and stop Ragnvalder, we will be forced to kill him. If we let him have his revenge, he will kill Lagarde, forcing us into a fight with Dars. There does not seem to be a way to resolve this situation peacefully, as Ragnvalder is completely consumed by rage from the loss of his family. It is best that we have Ragnvalder leave the party before entering the ancient city to avoid this encounter entirely. Though it may seem harsh, he is a massive liability to our party. He must now walk his own path and find another way to deal with his anger. At the center of the ancient city, we find a nameless figure blocking our path. He guards the gates of eternity and refuses to give us passage until we overcome a specific set of trials. We must obtain the souls of Nilvan the Endless, Voltail the Enlightened, and Chambara the Tormented, 3 out of the 4 reigning new gods. Once again, we are met with a seemingly impossible task. How could a mortal ever hope to slay a god? It is nothing more than madness. Despite this monumentous challenge, Lagarde's will remains unshaken. He believes that he was imprisoned here for a reason, and that the reason lies beyond the gates of eternity. We had ventured too deep. There is no turning back now. We reluctantly search the city for the new gods to no avail. The city is surprisingly run down for a place meant to house the gods. There is in fact almost no trace of the new gods at all. All that remains are abominable creatures lurking the city streets. It is then that we come across a strange-looking monument called the Beacon of the Depths. Like the doors to the ancient city, it also has a cube-shaped hole in it. As we place the cube of the depths inside the beacon, time begins to shift backwards. The ancient city, which is presently in ruins, is restored to its former glory and revealed to be Mahabre, the very place where the Fellowship battled the old gods before obtaining godhood themselves. In Mahabre, we find the tomb of an old god, Olmer. Here lies his mortal remains before he ascended. Next to his corpse, we observe a strange being arise from a green hue. She is called the Lady of the Moon and is seemingly non-hostile. She serves the moon god, Re, who up to this point we have heard little about. She offers to help the player, alleviating them of any ailment. This is incredibly useful, as fractures, anal bleeding, and limb losses can only be healed through marriage or by the Lady of the Moon. However, she demands a price far too steep. The girl, her master, the moon god, demands for her. Of course we decline, but our minds begin to wonder what an old god could possibly want from this poor girl. Perhaps there's something more to her, but it matters not. We are not going to let her get caught up in the schemes of the gods. In the temple district, we encounter a group of statue-like beings created by the old gods. They are to look over and protect the city until the promised king returns. Next to the clay figurines, we find the pit of enlightenment. We feel surprisingly at peace here. By praying at the altar, we are transported to the hall of the gods. You are greeted by towering figures seated around massive dining tables. It is here that we come to a shocking realization. These are all the new gods of the past. Just like the Fellowship, they were once humans and sought to challenge the reign of the old gods, but ultimately failed. They now sit idle in this hall. Their ambitions failed. The old gods were right. Even after achieving godhood, mortals cannot hope to replace them. The reign of a new god is temporary and fleeting. They will soon be replaced by another fool, blinded by the temptation of power. As a reward for making it this far in our journey, the new gods will answer any questions we have about this world. We learn that the fifth member of the Fellowship, the Forgotten One, the one who heeded the words of the old gods and refused to become a new god, is none other than the alchemist, Nostramus. Understanding the greater scheme of things, he would walk his own path, the path of enlightenment. There is another who, like Nostramus, saw the frivolous nature of the new gods, but he would only come to this realization after becoming a new god himself. Buried beneath a pile of flesh and gore in the dungeon of fear and hunger lies the wizard, Nasra. Before Valtail, he was the previous new god that oversaw the grand libraries, but he is now a shell of his former self, losing his body and a good chunk of his power. But even in this withered down state, he is still a force to be reckoned with. He quite literally cannot be killed, both as a party member and as an enemy. Nasra realized during his reign as a new god that he would never be able to bring about any meaningful change. He now harbors a deep resentment towards the current new gods, who still believe there is merit to what they do. It is now abundantly clear that the divinity of the new gods is imperfect. Their ascension is incomplete. We know that it is possible for humans to become beings that rival the old gods, as was the case with Olmer, but we still don't know what the specific requirements are. Perhaps we will never find the answer, or perhaps the answer lies beyond the gates to eternity. Whatever the case may be, one thing is clear: we must bring an end to the reign of the new gods. We see a lone tower in the distance to the east of the map. It immediately catches our eye, so we make our way towards it. But on our way there, something happens that makes our hearts sink into our stomach. The girl had been snatched through a hole in the wall by some horrid monstrosity. In a state of panic, we immediately chase after her. We find the creature, smiling, gently patting the girl's head. The girl is shivering in disgust and fear. We violently draw our swords and slay the beast in one swift attack. The girl is elated to see you. She doesn't say a word, but you can see tears of joy in her eyes. The harvestman is a particularly repulsive enemy, known to harvest the organs of its victims while still alive. Who knows what would have happened to the girl if we were a moment later. We finally arrive at the tower, and in it we find a lone bed. The room feels somewhat safe. Perhaps we can use this opportunity to gather our strength. As we fall asleep, Restless dreams take over our consciousness. The feverish dreams make you twist and turn in the bed. We fall deeper and deeper into the slumber. As we open our eyes, we find ourselves in the kingdom of Rondon. The city looks familiar, but something feels off. In this dream sequence, we are shown the backstories of our protagonists in greater detail. We find Kahara in a brothel. He has become romantically involved with one of the prostitutes, Celeste, who has now fallen pregnant. It is unclear whether or not Kahara is the father. Nevertheless, he is still worried about her and wishes to free her from this unscrupulous profession. He then takes up the perilous job of rescuing Lagarde, which promises a hefty reward. This is the true reason why Kahara risked his life in coming to the dungeon, not for his own greed, but to save the ones he loved. Next, we see Enki. He is about to sacrifice himself to Olma. He feels he has reached the limits as a mortal and can no longer make any progress in the pursuit of knowledge. But just before he is killed, he is shown visions of the prophesied one, Lagarde, whom he then sets out to find. In these foggy streets of Rondon, we see multiple posters of missing children, 13 since the start of the year. In a dark alleyway, we see something moving in the shadows. A small child, ravaged, crawls towards you with a look of fear in his eyes. But before he can muster a word, he is dragged back into the darkness, followed by horrific noises and the sound of a cat. When you head over to check, the two have seemingly vanished. Even in our dreams, the pocket cat haunts us. We now proceed to see Ragnvaldr's backstory, who has returned from his hunting trip to find his village attacked by the Knights of the Midnight Sun. What is this? Ulve, are you still alive? Ragnvaldr, you came. They came while you were gone. Those knights, who were they? The Knights of the Midnight Sun. Knights of the Midnight Sun. The pretty man with the locks of a fair maiden, the captain. He wanted what we brought from Vinland. I think I'm going to sleep now. Ulve, rest in peace. Hilda and Bjorn. Ragnvaldr rushes to his wife and son. The land is densely populated by corpses. There are heavy losses on both sides. We follow the trail of blood back to the cabin, which appears to be Ragnvaldr's home. He exits the house in grief. This can't be unforgivable. Unforgivable! As we enter the house, we see an old woman hunched over a threading wheel. She is not responsive to our words. Her true form is then revealed as the Skin Granny, a mythical creature based on legends from the people of Oldegard. She is known to rip off the face of her victims and stretch it across her own as some sort of trophy. A sadistic beast. After severing all of her limbs, we finally put the foul thing to rest. The final flashback we see is that of Lagarde and Dars. They believe you're the one from the prophecies. Those ancient texts are but child's wordplay. Of course, that doesn't mean I shouldn't use it to my advantage. But really, many things are scarily accurate in the prophecy. It talks of the fair-haired man and the one who rivals the gods in both power and beauty. Here I thought all the older gods to be ugly as hell. Dars, don't tell me you buy that stuff too. No one of the new gods is supposedly beautiful, just as the tormented one used to be. The texts also speak of he who unites the warring states, not by the power of the golden staff, but by the power of a dozen pitchforks. Well, all the kings do hate me at this point, so that one line I can agree with. I will strive to unify these lands, be it in the prophecies or not, no matter the cost. But I feel like I'm really close to achieving my goals, but the last step is not clear. It is still shrouded in mist. I'm not certain if this is the path to achieve this all. What do you mean? You are just a few steps from founding your own kingdom and becoming one of the most fabled rulers of our time. You'd make a great ruler, I'm sure of it. The common people love you already. Legard becomes lost in thought. I'm sure of it, she says. What difference would it make anyway? The history has proven time and time again that order, virtue, and tranquility do not last. I need something definite, something pure. I need to ascend above the kings and queens of our times. The last step isn't shrouded in mist. It's waiting for me in the depths of the darkness. A while later, Das confronts Legard about the siege on Oldegard. Legard, I need to ask what this campaign in the north is all about. I don't quite understand the importance of expanding our reign all the way over there. Frankly, I'm afraid such a campaign could have a negative impact on your reputation. Thanks for your honest words, Das. However, my mind is set. The campaign in the north is vital to my plans. They have something that belongs to me. Something that belongs to you? What are you talking about? I have to reach greater heights. This is the only way. The flashback ends, and we are now met by the new goddess, Novan. She glances over at the girl briefly. The girl seems nervous around Novan. Novan acknowledges the failures and shortcomings of the new gods, but also believes in the endless potential of humanity. She expresses the need for something greater to set mankind free. The new goddess then asks us for a strange favor in exchange for her soul. She wants us to take her child to the heart of darkness. She gives no indication as to who her child is or where the heart of darkness is, but we agree nonetheless. She seems to be incredibly sincere and bears no ill intent. Novan gives the girl one last gaze before leaving. We received the endless soul. We can find the new god Voltaire in the grand libraries of Mahabre. It is here he chose to spend the majority of his time, obsessed with the creation of artificial life. He wrongfully believed this to be the key that was separating the new gods from the old. We can find his soulless creations scattered throughout the city. In the inner sanctums of the libraries, we find Voltaire. But before we can confront him, he plunges himself into the darkness, and from the darkness, the Enlightened One arises, his form now distorted. This fight is unique in the fact that you can defeat him without ever lifting a finger. By talking to Voltaire and besting him in a battle of knowledge, you are able to inflict massive damage. Once the new god's brain is destroyed, he becomes completely harmless. With one final blow, the head of Voltaire sinks back into the darkness from which it arose. His millennia of wisdom and knowledge flow through our brains. It is far too much to process. We obtained the enlightened soul. If we visit Voltaire in the present, we are met with a pathetic sight. He has attempted to hang himself, but his godly body would not allow him the mercy of death. The new god has lost all hope of ever reaching the old gods. His whole existence has been pointless. Next on our hit list is Chambara, the Tormented One. He resides within the Temple of Torment. Once again, we must travel to the past. But before we can face him, we have to make a sacrifice, a trial to make sure we are worthy of receiving the tormented soul. Luckily for us, we do not have to sacrifice any of our party members. By heading to Nastra's secret laboratory, we can create a husk of ourselves. The old wizard was seemingly trying to create a replacement body. We can now use the mindless husk as a sacrifice. The new gods seem to have caught wind of our plan and attempts to stop us. We managed to temporarily immobilize him, but his eyes remain furiously fixated on us. As we rip the skin off our sacrifice, blood begins to flow throughout the temple, and from a deep pool of blood, the tormented one arises. Without saying a word, the tormented one stares at you. Our attacks do not seem to faze him. A terrible sensation fills our body. His chains of torment inflict heavy bleeding. The wheels are protecting him from our attacks. We switch our focus to the metal contraptions. His body is now vulnerable. We are victorious. Chambara's body sinks back into the pool of blood. We acquired the tormented soul. Returning to the present, we find Chambara's withered body laying on the ground. His time is nearly at an end. Desperately gasping for breath, the tormented one passes his knowledge on to you. We learn the spell, Chains of Torment, an unexpected act of kindness. We now have the required souls to access the gates of eternity. As one last trial, the nameless figure guarding the entrance challenges us to a duel. Centuries have passed since the Guardian last had the pleasure of battle. For accepting his request, the figurine thanks us. Sadly, the fight does not last long. After going toe-to-toe with the new gods, this encounter was almost trivial. After defeating Nameless, an extremely wicked scent fills the air. One we have become all too familiar with. Well, hello again, stranger. We meet again in such a picturesque environment. You must be the one who opened the door to this lovely place. You know, I came to a sudden realization that you happen to have that lovely little human girl with you. And I've been asking for such a thing for a while now. I think you should seriously consider my offer and just hand over the girl. How's it going to be, old chap? The friendly demeanor of the pocket cat seems to shift. He is deadly serious. You feel a terrible sense of terror. No, I'm afraid I can't do that. No. The pocket cat's form distorts into something even more horrific. He's now more than double your size. You see a large chap like myself asking nicely for a small little offering. Something so insignificant. You barely even know this little creature. You just met her a few fleeting moments ago. Yet you decline me this tiny pleasure, my only pleasure. The pocket cat's intimidating aura is overwhelming. I'll ask once more. Will you politely give me the girl? The terrifying monster almost makes you reconsider, but as the girl tightly grabs your arm with tears in her eyes, you realize there's no circumstance under which you could abandon her. You fear disastrous consequences for your answer. I said no. No. This one says no. Master. What do I do? The pocket cat begins to look at the moon. After letting out a sigh of disappointment, he reverts to his normal form. You don't always get what you want, huh? I did think you loved me. I really did. The pocket cat does not seem to be addressing the player. I mean, how else do you explain all those long gazes we shared? And how we always used to talk through the long hours of the night, just the two of us. Maybe our feet gently touched each other when no one else was watching. I thought there was something there. I'm not going to lie. This breaks my heart. I think it's best for me to go. Just leave this place. If you ever... No. Some things are better left unsaid. I'll leave while I still have my dignity. Goodbye. After that strange encounter, we are left scared and confused. Who is the pocket cat's master? And who was he talking to? By asking the new gods about him, we learn that he is in fact a servant of the trickster moon god, Rare. Unlike the other old gods, Rare is a jealous kind and does not wish humanity to obtain godhood, as feeble as their attempts may be. Like the Lady of the Moon, it seems he instructed the pocket cat to obtain the girl. The reason behind the order still eludes us, but the cogs in our mind begin to turn. With all distractions out the way, we finally enter the gates of eternity, and behind it lies a golden temple, or what remains of it. Within the temple, we find the last of the new gods, Francois, the dominating one. Only, he's not so dominating. The new god is surprisingly kind and polite. He acknowledges that his time has come, and that he is nothing but a puppet of the old gods. We can't help but pity the old fool. To end his reign as a new god, we are instructed to travel back to the past and face him in his prime. He even gives us a hint on how to defeat him. We travel to past Mahabre one last time. The golden temple now shimmers in the sunlight. At the end of the temple, we find the dominating one. He looks at us with utter disgust, laughing at the thought of us ever ending his rule. His arrogance, however, is backed up by strength. During the 800 years he spent as a new god, not a single other person managed to ascend into godhood. But luckily for us, he does have one crippling weakness: his pride. By reminding him of his insignificance in the greater scheme of things, his mind will falter, leaving him vulnerable. His arrogance leads to his downfall. With Francois defeated, the reign of the new gods has come to an end. Behind the corpse of the dominating one, we find what he has been so desperately guarding for all these years: the Throne of Ascension. As you close in on the throne, you feel the air standing still. It radiates immense power. This is without a doubt the pathway to becoming a god. Legard steps forward. This throne. This is the moment I've strived for. This is the moment I've suffered for. Legard, what do you mean? You said before you couldn't remember. Das, you remember our talk about the path. You might not understand this yet, but this is it. The path. I thought you said you couldn't remember anything. In order to reach greater heights, to unify the lands, to bring upon a new era, I need this power. The strength of kings and queens is not enough. I need more, something that lasts beyond me. Why would you look for power and justice in a place like this? Such pure virtues couldn't exist here. This place taints everything it touches. Das, do you think any of the grand kingdoms the history books speak of stand on pure foundation? They were all built on bloodshed and violence. But what if there was a way that wouldn't require the lives of thousands of soldiers on opposing sides? What if such a grand kingdom only required one soul to succumb to the darkness? Only one soul to be tainted? Can anything so grand be built on rotten foundations? Legard gives us one final look. His eyes linger on the girl. He then sits on the Throne of Ascension and is seemingly taken away. With tears in her eyes, Das expresses her deep gratitude for accompanying her on this journey. She then apologizes for having to part ways so abruptly. Before we can get off a word, she dashes to the throne, giving chase to Legard. Kahara and the girl are left alone. He reminisces about the time he spent with his comrades, but he is not foolish enough to follow them. Besides, he had a promise to keep. Our characters must now walk different paths. But before we continue, let us check in with Enki, who has been relatively uninvolved with the story so far. On his quest for knowledge, Enki encounters Voltaire in the grand libraries of Mahabre. The now defeated new god recognizes that Enki, like himself, seeks true enlightenment. He warns him not to make the same mistake he did in becoming a new god, but rather to consult the one who did not give in to the temptation of power, Nostramus, the Forgotten One. We find Nostramus in a hidden lab, deeply immersed in his studies. He seems to have been expecting us. He informs us that there is no end to the path of true enlightenment, for knowledge of the world is ever growing and changing. One must be prepared to continually pursue it. The Forgotten One recommends that Enki sit on the Throne of Ascension and face his godly self, but not give in to the temptation. Of course, this is much easier said than done, so he gives us a soul anchor, an ancient relic said to bind your soul to your body in all situations. After sitting on the Throne of Ascension, Enki meets a reflection of his new god self. It shows him visions of the feats he could accomplish as a new god, but he came prepared. He was warned of the lust. Enki declines his godhood and leaves the plains of ascension. With the newfound knowledge he obtained from his godly self, he would claim the grand libraries of Mahabharata as his own. It is there he would find the secret to prolong his life and set out to become the most powerful mortal in existence. After leaving the party, unable to exact his revenge, Ragnvalder directed his fury elsewhere. He would go on to slaughter every creature in the dungeon, leaving no trace of the dark. But that was not enough, for the corruption had spread far beyond the reaches of the dungeon. He knew firsthand how disastrous this evil could be. It is restless and relentless. For him to stop it from spreading, he too must become restless and relentless. From the moment he left the dungeon of fear and hunger, Ragnvalder would dedicate his life to hunting down every monstrosity conceived by the darkness. His pursuit was ruthless, and his methods vicious. The beasts would eventually come to fear him as the god of ultra-violence. After following Legard on the throne, Das finds herself in a pitch-black new world, an endless void, the true Mahabharata. This is where the old gods used to reside. After fighting off all types of strange prehistoric creatures, Das desperately searches for Legard. She fears he has fallen into the same trap as the new gods, but at the same time she knows how incredible he is. He would never do something so foolish without a plan. She sees a figure in the distance, covered by a yellow cloak. She calls out to him, but there is no answer. She eventually makes her way around to him. He seems different somehow. How long has it been? 100 years or so? Have you found what you were looking for? I found something. They say Sylvian created us according to her own image. But what if she is a god only in abstract, whom we have made physical according to our own image? That would essentially reverse our roles. Or do the old gods even exist at all? They are something we as humans can no longer rely on. I do not know if you can ever understand my motivations truly, but this is something only I can go through with. I was always meant to do this. I did try to live my life otherwise, but it was to no avail. Das, you know this. We tried to make change for the longest time. To live is the same as to suffer. To survive, we need to find some meaning from all the suffering. The truth behind it all is in the contrast. Without suffering, there would be no bliss or paradise. It is my duty to craft the paradise out of the miserable existence of human life. Only I can do it. Legard looks lovingly at Das's face, almost to reassure her. I mean you no harm. I am your god after all. To show how much I love you, I will release you from this darkness. If you kneel to me, I will let you out. Das could never disobey the man she loved so dearly. After acknowledging him as a god, Legard would set Das free from the dungeon. He would then go on to reform the Knights of the Midnight Sun. Using his newfound power, he would unify the Western world at a rapid rate. Legard would eventually be hailed as the Yellow King, bringing prosperity to the world, the likes of which we had never seen before. Legard had fulfilled his prophecy. He had far surpassed the accomplishments of the new gods, but was still unlike the old gods. The Yellow King was something different entirely. The final story we must conclude on is that of Kahara and the girl. The two had formed a strong bond over the course of their long journey and have now become inseparable. Kahara deeply considers leaving the dungeon and taking her with him. but the promise he made to Novan holds him back. At this point, he is fairly certain that this girl is Novan's child, but part of him does not wish this to be true. He would eventually consult the new gods to confirm this theory. There he would learn that not only is she the child of the new goddess, but that Legard is her father. Kahara grits his teeth at the thought of Legard abandoning his child. He is now conflicted as what to do. Should he honor the wishes of her mother? She obviously would want the best for her child, and the girl clearly holds great importance to the greater scheme of things. After spending some time in contemplation, he would decide to at least see for himself what lies in the heart of darkness. They could always turn back if what they find is not to their liking. The heart of darkness implies the source of all the corruption within the dungeon. This would be the god of the depths. If you remember, we had already destroyed some of the old god's organs scattered throughout the dungeon. In the present Mahabre, where the Throne of Ascension previously lied, we find the final organ. By slicing it open, it stops moving completely. You hear a faint scream-like sound echoing throughout the dungeon. It would seem that an older presence had died. As we make our way to the god of the depths, we find its mouth wide open. There seems to be a ladder leading down the creature's mouth. We reluctantly climb down, and as we reach the bottom, the mouth closes behind us. Kahara clenches his fist in regret. We have now entered the gauntlet, the deepest part of the dungeon where the darkness runs strongest. It is here we encounter the most horrifying of creations, filthy abominations that have indulged in the most heinous of acts. The gauntlet is inundated with deadly traps. One wrong step could mean death. As we delve deeper and deeper into the darkness, the ground breaks from beneath our feet. We fall into a pitch-black room, and a sense of dread fills our bodies. A terrifying presence has entered the room. The Crow Mauler has returned. Although he retains some damage from our last battle, he has grown an extra head. His most deadly weapon has doubled in lethality. We feel a strong killing intent from the beast. We were definitely not prepared. On our next attempt, we make sure to blind him from the start with our last 2 red vials. The Crow Mauler violently pecks around himself to no avail. With his most powerful attribute nullified, we finally put Captain Rudima to rest, hopefully for good this time. As we journey in further, we seemingly reach the end of the gauntlet. This must be the heart of darkness. There doesn't seem to be anything here besides a mountain of corpses. The girl is looking at the darkness. There seems to be no end to it. Kahara warns her not to stand too close to the edge. The girl gives him a warm, reassuring smile. Little did he know that this would be her last. Something beyond his understanding was beginning to happen. A chill runs down his spine as he gets the urge to vomit. His eyes remain fixated on the girl. The girl's body begins to violently distort as she cries out in pain. Kahara desperately calls out to her, but she is unable to respond. Her eyes look to him for help, but he does not know what to do. The girl's body transforms into something unrecognizable. The god of fear and hunger is born. Kahara tries speaking to the girl, but her speech is beyond his understanding. All further attempts to talk do not elicit a comprehensible response. The god reminisces about the kindness Kahara showed her throughout their time together. That time he gave her the doll, that time he gave her the dagger. All those small gestures seem to be of great significance to her. The god refuses to attack the man who she cherished so dearly, but this last shred of humanity seems to be lost as her form changes once again. The god begins to attack Kahara, who has no choice but to defend himself. As the god of fear and hunger grows more and more horrific, Kahara comes to the painful realization that this is no longer the girl he once knew, and that he can no longer save her. The grief is too much for him to bear, but this is overcome by an intense feeling of hatred hatred for the old gods that abandoned us, hatred for no one who condemned her daughter to this cruel fate, and hatred for himself, the fool who facilitated this madness. In a fit of rage, Kahara begins to attack the god. He can immediately tell that this being is something far beyond the new gods. He knows he has no hopes of defeating it. The newly born god finally settles on a shape. It bears almost no resemblance to the girl he once loved. Still, Kahara cannot help himself from crying. As bloody tears run down his face, the god of fear and hunger acknowledges his suffering. Kahara awakens on a bed of flowers, his body in tatters. He uses the last of his strength to crawl towards the god. He can now finally understand the god's words, but he no longer has the strength to respond. His mind drifts in and out of consciousness. In his last moments, Kahara reminisces about his comrades, whom he grew very fond of, the girl whom he cared for like a daughter, and his lover, whom he can no longer return to. The god grants Kahara a peaceful death. He would meet his end in the dungeon. His efforts would go unsung, and his name erased from history. However, he played a vital part in the story. He facilitated the birth of an ascended god, a being that rivals the old gods. The birth of the god of fear and hunger marked the start of the cruel age, an era where fear was the main source of motivation and where hunger was what kept people moving forward. This potent combination would bring about significant advancement to mankind. When I started Fear and Hunger, I was definitely not expecting a happy ending, but the way the girl was handled was a special kind of cruelty. This poor, helpless girl, who we spent our entire playthrough protecting, was grotesquely morphed into something unrecognizable before our very eyes, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Whether her birth as a god was for the betterment of humanity or not, it was still a grueling thing to experience. We now understand why the moon god was so desperately after the girl. He feared what she would become. He feared the power she would acquire. This last portion of the video will be focused on discussing how the girl and the god were able to surpass the new gods in two completely different ways. Starting with the girl, she was able to become an ascended god like Alma. When we look at the lives of the two people in question, we see some striking similarities. They both have divine lineage. The girl's mother was the new goddess Nilvan, and Alma's father was an unnamed god. Both the two individuals experienced immense suffering, Alma at the hands of the kings and sultans of his time, and the girl from the cruelty of the dungeon. In the case of the girl, there seemed to be a catalyst for her ascension, which was exposing her to the source of darkness within the corpse of an old god. The catalyst in Alma's case remains unclear. Perhaps it was the crucifixion. In any case, I cannot overstate the monumental achievement of becoming an ascended god, a being on par with the old gods. The old gods possess unimaginable power. They are not even comparable to the new gods. Remember the new god Nasra, the seemingly immortal wizard who was considered to be strong even amongst his peers. This is what happens when he encounters the old god Grogaroth. He is instantly vaporized, and we now have to start the battle down a party member. But battle would be the wrong word, for we cannot hope to fight an old god. We are simply at their mercy. After quote-unquote winning a battle with an old god, Sylvian kindly lets you go, and Grogaroth destroys your mind. Another thing to mention is that this is not even their full power. This is the traces of themselves that they left behind in our world before departing. I hope that puts into perspective how impressive the feat of becoming an ascended god is, for they are the only beings that can rival the old gods, with the possible exception of one other. Legard, perhaps the most interesting and important character in the game, the prophesied king who would unify the lands. It is not entirely clear where the prophecy originated. I assume the prophecy is from the old gods, as the clay figurines in Mahabharata, who were created by the old gods, speak of the promised true king who will return to claim the Throne of Ascension. And that is exactly what Legard did. This is further backed up by a line in the ending C2 that says, "It was as if the old gods themselves were on his side." The jealous and inferior new gods reject the prophecy, but that is to be expected. Whether the prophecy was true or not, Legard did end up fulfilling it. Shortly after his ascension into godhood, he would usher humanity into its most prosperous era in history. This is something both the new and old gods could not do. Despite using the same means of ascension as the new gods, Legard was able to surpass them, becoming a completely different type of god. It is never outright explained how this was done, but it most likely has to do with his soul, or possible lack thereof. You see, every character and enemy in the game, with a few exceptions, has a soul that you can take from their corpse using a soul stone. However, when we try and use a soul stone on Legard's body, the soul stone does not react to his remains. We get the same message when trying to use a soul stone on Valtail's artificial creations. Now this can mean one of two things. Either his soul cannot be taken using a soul stone, or he does not have a soul to begin with. It is possible that his soul may be too powerful to acquire with a soul stone, or that there is something binding his soul to his body, like the soul anchor given to Enki by Nostramus. It is also possible that Legard was either created without a soul, or that he lost his soul somewhere along the line. Maybe that was a requirement for conceiving the girl. Either way, he is a remarkably special being, and his significance will no doubt be revealed in the future. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I have not played the second game as yet, so these are just my theories and speculation based on the first game. Alright, I think I've said everything I want to about the game. Let's summarize briefly. Fear and Hunger is an exceptionally unique game. You most likely have never played anything like it. It manages to blend the survival horror and RPG genres in a brutally unforgiving manner, while still being fair and rewarding. The lore of the universe is ridiculously deep and interesting. The art design is terrifying and is nicely complemented by the chilling soundtrack. If you are looking to be challenged, if you are looking to be intellectually stimulated, if you are looking to be deeply disturbed to your very core, this game is for you. I still can't believe this game was created by a single person. The developer truly deserves all the success he has gotten. I've rambled on for far too long. If you've made it this far in the video, firstly, why? Secondly, thank you. If you want to see more content from me, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Also let me know what you thought of the video in the comments. I truly appreciate any feedback. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you very soon.